My name is Mike Rozman. I'm CEO of BoeFly, and I appreciate you investing your time to join us today. Since 2010, BoeFly has been focused on helping franchisors and franchisees accelerate growth. For franchisors, this means establishing the most efficient way to diligence new franchisees. This year, more than 200 franchisors have relied on BoeFly's diligence service, BeVerify, to vet their applicants, and by doing so, those brands are speeding their sales process while reducing their staff's load. For franchisees, this means delivering more efficient and competitive financing, both for SBA and conventional lending. We know that lending is always a critical path item. If a franchisee can't get a loan, they can't open. We also know that interest rates have been a headline issue. So with that in mind, we've asked some experts in franchise lending to join us today to share their perspective. Thrilled to be joined by Brooke Ingram, Senior Director of Funding Services at BoeFly, David Canet, Head of SBA Lending at ConnectOne Bank, Gretchen Blake, Vice President with IRH, and Joe Barbato, National Sales Manager at First Bank of the Lake. And we're going to get to know them a little bit more as the session starts. Couple housekeeping items. This call is being recorded, so if you want to share a recording with any of your colleagues, you'll be able to. And we'll also be asking, we're actually going to start this way of asking some poll questions to get some perspective from you members of the audience, get a little perspective of whether you're a franchisee or franchisor, and for those franchisees, how many units you have. We also invite you to ask questions. So please go ahead and add in questions through the chat capability, or click ask a question, and we'll go ahead and make sure we do our best to address those questions. Any that we don't address during the session, we'll go ahead and get back to you there after the session. So let's go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and, bear with me 1 second, stop sharing that, see if I can push out this first poll question. Let's see if we can go ahead and launch this. So this is quick, tell us about yourself. So what best describes you, describes your business? Are you a franchisee? Are you a franchisor? Are you a supplier? Those lenders on the session, define yourself as a supplier today. Gretchen, Joe, and David, you guys can go ahead and skip that step for now, but we'll count you guys as suppliers. And for those franchisees, we're interested in seeing what level of units you have. Are you just opening your first unit? 1 to 3, 4 to 10, or greater than 10. This just helps us get a little bit more perspective from to be able to cater our comments for our panelists and make sure we're directing those in the right way. And remember, we are going to open it up for questions as well. While that's up, and I'll leave this open for another bit of time. I want to start at this very high level, right? So we say, well, what's the state of franchise lending? Franchise lending is a very broad conversation. We're going to first define SBA versus conventional. And so I'm going to go ahead and pivot that. Before we do, I think I'm going to go ahead and end the poll, and let's see if I can publish the results. So it looks like half the folks on are franchisees. And of those franchisees, it looks like the great majority, more than 40%, are opening your first unit. But we also have folks that have, more than 10 units and in between as well. And we do have a handful of franchisors as well. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing that information. And so let's go ahead and close that down. So I mentioned we want to share a little perspective of conventional versus SBA. Well, what are those things? And I think when I first told folks, I work in the franchise lending industry, they say, well, isn't that just a traditional bank loan? So maybe Gretchen, you're with IRH. Tell us a little bit about yourself and about your institution, and explain to us, if you met someone in an elevator, how would you describe conventional lending and conventional franchise lending in particular?
Sure. Yeah, just talk about the niche. So IRH Capital, I'm in a Chicago burb right now. And we are a direct conventional lender. And what that means, since you're asking what the programs are, is that we are non-SBA or a conventional lender. We do commercial lending only. And we take a first position lien on specifically what we're financing in most cases. Things like the new store builds, acquisitions, and we don't take personal assets. So we don't take a second on your home, rentals, things like that. So as a conventional lender, it's our own loans and what we're doing here in-house. So that
Well,
just gives you a little bit of 5-second overview.
No, it's great. And so, and we'll hear from our SBA lenders in a second, but when a loan that you've made for some reason defaults, that's all your risk.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. So in that case, our goal is to go after that equipment and that business specifically. Mm-hmm.
And so, but you don't, presumably you don't get a ton of collateral, so you're not taking that real estate collateral. And it's fundamentally, I guess, a cash flow loan.
That's correct. That's correct. I mean, we're lending off, obviously, for new franchisees or people starting out, their personal strength, right, as well, because we don't have stores to look at. So in those cases, it is the personal strength. It is a very similar underwriting based on liquidity, personal credit, outside income, things like that. But once you're an existing franchisee, we really are lending not just on personal, but as you as an operator, your existing organization.
So, and I think we're going to come back to you for sure around perspective of, well, who would qualify versus SBA.
Sure.
So maybe David, you're leading SBA lending at ConnectOne, who happens to be BoeFly's parent bank, and so we've got a long-term relationship, and we're happy to be working with you guys, but other lenders as well. Take that other side of the coin. So you're an SBA lender. What does that mean? How do you tell your family and friends what an SBA loan is?
Certainly. And I'll just kind of give the 2-second commercial. ConnectOne Bank. We're a $10 billion bank based out of New Jersey. We provide a full boat of services to commercial and industrial and individual clients with a broad array of lending and cash management. We are an SBA preferred lender, and that's germane to Michael's question. And we serve the financing needs in my group of small businesses nationwide, and certainly very proud to partner with BoeFly in bringing capital and additional resources to franchise entrepreneurs. With that, I would say the primary way that the Small Business Administration programs differ from conventional loans would be in the nature of the collateral taken. So to Gretchen's point, Gretchen may look at strictly the business financials, business balance sheet for her source of repayment, as well as the source of collateral. From an SBA perspective, we take, and certainly under certain guidelines, which I won't get into, but we take a more global approach. We're looking certainly primarily at the business operations to either demonstrate repayment ability on a historical basis or a projected basis. We're looking at the assets of the business to secure the loan. And then we're looking at the strength of the guarantor, whether it's financial strength, experience, right, business background. And we won't get into this right now, but we may require, say, outside collateral, which might include a residence, the second lien on a residence, et cetera. I'd note that as an SBA preferred lender, the bank is lending the money. It is our money. When a bank does this, we service the loan. You are working with either Joe or myself, but you're working with the bank throughout the life of your loan. We are approving the loan. We are servicing the loan throughout the life of the loan. So any client of ConnectOne Bank SBA is working directly with my team. You are not working with the SBA. One of the things that gives us the ability to consider transactions that might not be considered under a non-SBA program is that while it is the bank's money, the SBA will give us a certain guarantee of the loan, which enables, it's a credit enhancement, right? So it enables us to get a little more creative in order to make deals happen.
Super helpful. So, Joe, you're in the same line of business. You're a leader of First Bank of the Lake. We've worked with you guys for years, and we're thrilled to have all of you guys on. But Joe, thanks for investing your time here too. Anything to add to David's comments around SBA and as again how you define it? Anything you'd want to raise, maybe in addition to what David brought up there?
Sure. I have the easiest job on the panel because if I follow David all the time, it's easy. You got a professional there who knows what he's doing. I could just say subtract ConnectOne, insert First Bank of the Lake. So I have the easiest job. I'll give you 2 seconds about First Bank of the Lake. We are a community bank based out of Osage Beach, Missouri. We have operations center on the East Coast in Greenville, South Carolina. I am in New Jersey. Not sure if you could kind of tell that, maybe a little bit of an accent. So I've heard. We are a preferred SBA lender, again, like ConnectOne Bank. Again, we're growing. I mean, at this point in time, we started de novo in 2019, and here we are in 2024. I think we're going to be up probably over 400 million in SBA, approvals before the end of September 30th. But again, just happy to be here along with this great panel. And as I said, just keep me following David so I can just kind of keep it short and sweet. It'll be really easy.
The old coattails approach. I like it, Joe. You and I come from the same cloth. So I'll ask you an additional question. So as a borrower shows up, are all SBA lenders created the same? Is it exactly the same? I know, or I would perceive that if someone's doing an SBA loan, if it's guaranteed by the government, it's guaranteed by the government. That doesn't change. What would be the experience differences, or why would you encourage someone to think about your bank versus maybe the local bank down the street?
Sure. Mike, it's a great question, obviously. So there are this set of rules that both David and I have to follow, and it's called the SBA SOP. It's available online. Please don't take the time to read it. It will make you a little crazy. So we have a defined set of eligibility rules, is the business a for-profit business that we have to follow. But every bank, to David's point, and I'm going to refer to David a lot, he hit it on the head. It is the bank's money that they're lending out, and we have a credit enhancement where the SBA will guarantee a certain percentage. Normally on a loan above 150, it's a 75% guarantee. So again, that is an inducement to us to make a loan that may not be available through Gretchen. So basically, David and I would look at the loans that Gretchen can't do for the most part. So, again, every bank has a little bit of a different credit appetite. Again, it's set down by our board of directors, much like David's, in terms of what we will and we will not do. So every bank has nuances that, can affect it, ability to finance multi-units at once. Even the concepts themselves, everyone has something a little bit different going on. So it's always good to talk to people like Brooke, who have the ability, has access to David and myself and Gretchen, so she can kind of pigeonhole or kind of direct the borrower to a lender that may be the best for them because of these little nuances that we have.
Super helpful. So Brooke, since Joe brought up your name, we'll go ahead and bring you in because I think it's a perfect timing as well. So great segue, Joe. Thanks for that. So Brooke, you lead the funding services team at BoeFly. Tell us a little bit about what that means.
Sure. So I have a team of funding specialists who specialize in different verticals. They work with individual business owners or prospective business owners, and we help put together the loan package, which includes all the personal business documents, business plan projections. We help with those. And what we try to do is work with that business borrower to figure out what the best solution for them is. We take into consideration their wants and needs, the brand, their long-term plans, whether, Joe mentioned they can finance multiple units at one time. And as, again, Joe mentioned, the banks that we work with, while maybe they all follow the same guidebook, they do have different credit boxes and different things they can offer. So where we really come into play is making sure that we connect that borrower with the bank that is going to be the best fit and that is going to be a great overall choice for them. Going back to what you said earlier about working with a lender here or BoeFly or the lender that might be down the street with the local bank, the lenders that we work with, the lenders we have here are very specialized in the franchise space and the business loan space. So we know that they're familiar with the franchise process and the SBA process, and they're going to be able to deliver a competitive and overall efficient experience.
So that maybe we'll start with that new franchisee who's never gotten a loan before. They're new to franchising. Maybe they've gotten their home mortgage loan, an auto loan. What are some of those main themes that maybe come as a surprise to that franchisee who's looking for their first loan? What are some of either the requirements that the lenders are going to go ahead and impose, or other surprises that, given your tenure, it's not a surprise to you, but that next franchisee is like, oh, I didn't know I had to do that. What are some of those ideas that come to mind?
So for me, I think the biggest shock is just the overall process. I hear people say all the time, well, I've gotten a car loan, I've gotten a home loan. I know, how to go through the process. And what I always tell people is it's like that, but like times 10, right? Especially the first time you go through it, you have to line up a lot more than just giving your documents to the bank that are approving the loan. You're also coordinating construction, you're coordinating trying to figure out the bids, the permits, and trying to have all of that line up at the right time. And there are, going to be documents and rules that have to be followed and things that need to be done a certain way. So I think that's probably one of the biggest shocks to new borrowers is just the overall process and the rules and trying to line things up appropriately. And I think the biggest piece of advice I give to those people is to try to stay in touch with like the, BoeFly funding specialist or your loan specialist to make sure that like you really are hitting everything that you need to hit at the right time.
So one of the things that I mentioned at the beginning is that for a lot of franchisors, BoeFly provides this technological service to diligence the franchise applicants, right? We provide the brand with a picture of verified liquidity and credit and criminal. So therefore, we meet a lot of franchisees very early. In some cases, they're applicants, they're not franchisees yet, but they intend to become a franchisee. So when you think about the timeline, I'm going to sign the franchise agreement. I've got to look. If it's a real estate-based concept, I got to look for real estate. I have to sign that lease. I have to find an architect. I have to do that bill. It's a really long timeline. When would you, if you were going to become a franchisee, when is it that you would start the financing prospect or process along that timeline? Would it be as soon as possible, or would it be not until you have the real estate figured out?
So yeah, Joe, go ahead. I've said enough.
I'm sorry, Brooke.
For now. No, please.
Listen, my take, Mike, is there really two pieces to that puzzle. There's the application process after you've decided on a franchise, possibly a location. And before that, I would always encourage people to start shopping before that, getting educated, knowing what the process is. I think I'll speak for David here. Our worst fear is when we get something coming across our desk, which won't happen with BoeFly, by the way, where we've got a signed purchase contract and a 60-day close. And we know from, just our backgrounds that the borrower, may or may not have an architect done or plans completed and have an overall scope of what has to be done. It is really very difficult to meet someone's objectives to close in a situation like that. Because again, just as you said, each part of the process has a timeline. So I would really encourage having some conversations early with as many people as you can, again, just to pick their brains, gain something from them. And, again, sometimes people we work with may not get a closing. It could be for a year and a half. But again, our job as part of the, we'll call it a steward of the SBA program, is to assist and educate the borrowers in terms of what they're getting into.
Along those lines, I like that too, what Joe said, of doing some of your research now. So a lot of the franchisors part of the process is you have to talk to lenders, right? And say, you've got to make a few calls to lenders. I like that because then that education process, like Joe said, starts. And so you're preparing. Most people will come to IRH before they sign the lease. Not many people want to sign a lease without having their financing in place. And we wouldn't recommend the same. For us, we're a little more live in the sense of the non-SBA and the direct program. I need a good week or two for a credit decision, but the permitting process, all those things that Joe mentioned, you have to have that all in place as well in order to start your project. So you could have the financing in place, but it'll be months and months down the line until someone needs paid. So the education process I would agree. I think that's crucial to start just finding out the pros and cons to both the programs, hence a call like this.
I think that's great, Gretchen. So, and maybe Brooke, I'll come back to you. So we saw that there's a handful of franchisors that are on the line. For those who are unfamiliar with BoeFly, why would you recommend they engage with BoeFly or send their franchisees to engage with BoeFly, as opposed to, back in the day, the franchisor would get, here's 10 lenders and go, hey, franchisee, go call these lenders. So Brooke, what's your thought on that? Like, why should someone work with a provider like BoeFly, which I'll say provides a support service rather than giving the franchisee 10 lenders and say, I'm aware of this from the Franchise Times finance resource. Like, what's your thought on that?
Yeah, so I think one of the nice things about working with BoeFly is, especially for those franchisors that have gone through BVerify, which is that diligence tool where we do the asset verification, background check, and credit check for the individual franchisee. For brands that use that, obviously, we have a really good baseline of the financeability of that candidate. So we know upfront, if there's any challenges that need to be tackled, are there credit issues that we need to get resolved up front? Are there liquidity issues that we need to talk to the borrower about now so that they can handle them and have a solution? But when they get to my team, we're advising them on all of these things, but we're also thinking about, again, does it make sense for Gretchen or Joe to take this deal? We're talking to the borrower about what their wants are. And I think our understanding of the credit box of our lenders is really, really helpful, because there may be a lender out there that's willing to do that lower equity injection or that slightly lower interest rate or no collateral, but not all banks are willing to do the exact same things. And if you're calling up banks, a lot of times they're going to tell you, of course we can do it, submit your application, and that's taking time. They're running your credit. And so I think it's just really helpful to get your package right the first time, get the expert guidance, and get connected with the bank that makes the most sense from the start.
We got a question from the audience, which I want to go ahead and congratulate the first audience member who asked a question, kind of broke the seal of the question. So I want to dive into it. I also want to tease up this idea of these kind of larger market concerns that we're seeing out there, and kind of the larger market perspective. So we're going to kind of go to that next. But in a very tactical question, maybe I'll start with you, David. If the franchise fee has been paid by the franchisee, is that considered equity for a credit evaluation process? Maybe you can address that for us.
The short answer is yes.
We're now we got the first question and we're efficiently answered it.
I'm happy to elaborate on that. So obviously, to Brooke's point, the amount of equity injection as it relates to the total project, love to talk about what the total project really is. That will differ by banks, right? From an SBA perspective, anywhere between 10 and 20%, just to give a range, right, is what might be expected from an equity perspective. And so, yes, the franchise fee does count toward the borrower's total equity injection. And just to make a comment about project, when a first-time, second-time franchisee and I know this is something BoeFly and Brooke obviously work together, will educate the new borrower on, is establishing what your project is. The more and the better defined your project is, the more the lender can lend you, and the smoother the transaction goes. So when we think about a project, it's obviously the franchise fee, but think about everything from starting your lease search or your location search. Think about the lease deposits, think about utility deposits, all the way through your first few months of lease, because working capital will become a component of this. All of your pre-opening expenses, your TIs, your soft costs. Again, I'd encourage everybody to really take some time. Obviously, the FDD is going to give you guidance on this, right, with regard to ranges for certain project costs and the cost to open a given store, but to think about other aspects of really what do you need to get these doors open and start doing business, every penny of it. Again, if you have represented that, not only does the lender kind of understand that you have your grip, your hands around what the project is, but it eliminates surprises. You don't want to run short of capital, certainly not before the doors open, but definitely not in the first year after either. So you need to kind of consider the whole ramp up period.
So, Joe, I'm going to tease up an idea for you. I'm going to ask you to think on it while I ask David one more question. But the question we got teed up around TIA, so a tenant improvement allowance, and how is that handled? That's going to be coming your way in a second, a little teaser. David, one of the questions we got, which kind of almost builds off one of your thoughts around that project cost, or the comments you just made about project cost is the idea of proceeding with a loan package while the location is still very much to be determined, right? So, yes, I might have some bands in the FDD on my build-out cost. If I'm downtown Manhattan or suburban New Jersey, it's going to be very different project costs, without a doubt. Is there a case to start down the road of building that loan package, even if the person doesn't have their location finalized? And how do you suggest navigating that timeline once the location is resolved?
Yeah, so no question as to starting your finance due diligence as early as possible, even before you have the location. Most of our clients that we work with, even that early in the stage, know the market they're going into. So you're going to have a general sense of what your lease rates are going to be, and you're going to be able to put together a project based upon that. And if you estimate your project at X, 500, 750, a million, 2.5 million, whatever the number is, then your lender, right, can essentially pre-qualify you. Okay, so based upon the size of your project, the concept you're working with, our familiarity with the concept, our projected cash flows for that particular concept, which of course I'd love the borrower to have input on, right? You should have your business plan somewhat formulated. But to go on, yes, your credit score, what does your personal financial statement look like? The question of collateral, is there anything outside of the assets of the business? And some concepts from a business collateral standpoint are quite light, right? And others maybe have some more material FF&E equipment components to it, so you might be able to get something there. But earlier in the process is better. If things change, I would say certainly the lenders on this call are nimble enough to be able to roll with those changes. We understand that there are going to be changes, just as long as there are no crazy material changes from the time that the pre-qualification is made. And by material, I mean like don't get into bankruptcy, don't spend every penny of your liquidity on a boat or something, so that when we look at it later, you get it though.
I mean, the boat's fine as far as I'm concerned. As long as you're getting it, using the boat. Joe, I'm still going to threaten again. I am going to come to you, but I want to get Brooke real quick. So one of the add-on question we just got on David's question was, how do you suggest navigating the timeline when finding the location is proving difficult? So you and your team have often worked with franchisees where you're going to work with them for a year, where you're collecting data. One idea that I'd love to hear you share a little bit about is this idea of, well, I provided you personal financial data and it was good and clean, but now it's 6 months have gone by. Even if I had a pre-approval from a lender that BoeFly was able to deliver, a lot of time's gone by when I found my ultimate real estate. Talk to us about refreshing the data around that personal financial statement, and how does that work with your franchisees?
Yes. So I wanted just to add on one thing to what David was saying, as far as like that pre-approval. So to start with, like when we on my team are working with somebody in their early stage, maybe no location's been determined, we like to use the high end of the FDD range, within reason, of course, but we like to go on the higher end and get those pre-approvals, adding in the contingency and the closing costs and all of those things that we know are going to be important, so that if things change, there's not the shock and surprise and potential issue. Because if you go on the low end, there's way more likelihood for there to be a liquidity shortfall or issue there. So we always try to take that approach. And I have found that if you're approved on the high end, if there are some changes, it's not as problematic. Now, what we do is, we get this pre-approval, let's say based on the high end of the range, and then maybe some time goes by. We always try to advise clients, don't make any big life decisions, buying a house, buying a boat, keep an eye on your credit, make sure all your accounts are up to date, because that personal financial statement and the credit report and the background checks, that all needs to be refreshed when you move forward. And so if you have had a big life change, it can negatively impact your overall approval. And one thing I always stress is like that initial approval, that term sheet, or even a commitment letter does not hold 3 months down the road. So we have to make sure that you're keeping that good financial, strong picture. I mean, always, of course, but especially until you actually close the loan, the banks are looking at it periodically.
And so that idea of there's some real benefit in starting early, but recognize that maybe data needs to be refreshed, and that's part of the process.
Exactly.
Great. So Joe, I am really going to come to you now. So we had a question around tenant allowance. How does it work when someone were to get an SBA loan from you?
Sure. So tenant improvement allowance, affectionately known as TIA in the business, is based on a leasehold site where the landlord is going to give the borrower some incentive or to augment or essentially reduce the monthly payments on the lease without directly reducing it. So it usually will be conditional based on usually construction. Sometimes it's after certificate of occupancy is completed. I've actually seen some where they're progress payments. The bank does have to include the amount of that TIA in the amount of the loan within loan proceeds. That does impact the borrower's SBA guarantee fee, which we haven't brought up yet, but I'm sure we will get to it, which is the fee that has to be paid to the government to get us to them to guarantee the loan for us. It's non-discussion, et cetera, but that is there. And at the end of that time, that balance will come back to the bank. We take an assignment of it to reduce the outstanding principal balance of the loan. Okay, there's a lot of mechanical that goes in here. I see, Gretchen and David nodding their heads. There's no discussion on this. I mean, this is coming straight from our partners at the SBA. This is the way they want it to handle. Sadly, that does impact your projections on the loan. So if your TIA is $200,000, your loan still has to cash flow at a higher dollar amount before it does get reduced. And believe it or not, you'll find this hard to believe, guys. It's on the panel. Sometimes it doesn't happen, which is the exact reason why the SBA, asks us to include that in the loan. I do have to circle back one thing that David said, which is really important when he was talking about injection. As you pay that franchise fee, keep the mechanism how you paid it, put it in a file. I advise people to start a file. Again, if you want a paper file, it's wonderful, or if it's on your computer, but start it. Keep copy of the payment receipt and how you paid it. If you paid it out of your checking account, grab that checking account statement and pop it in, into that folder. You will thank us all later, because sometimes there's a massive time elapse between when you pay it and when you close, and the bank does have to verify that money, where it's come from. So, really key point there.
Well, and so, Joe, I just want to stay on that point real quickly.
Sure.
One of the additional questions we had, so the question, which I think maybe David addressed right on this point, was, well, does the franchise fee count towards it? And that goes to the equity injection. So it's just as you were addressing, one of the questions we got was, aside from the franchise fee or initial operational expenses, this person asked about such as rent, salaries, and other operational expenses. They wrote valued as collateral. I'm going to kind of adjust that to say, does it get valued as part of the equity injection? And I'm sure there are rules associated with this. So this idea of, give us a little bit more color around equity injection. And so you just said, hey, keep track of all the expenses that you're incurring. This person says, well, what about my rent? What about my salaries that I'm paying? Can that count towards either equity injection, or they wrote collateral? I think that's probably not the right word choice there.
Sure. Well, of course, David gets the yes, no, answer. I get the one that's a little bit more ambiguous and wide open. So the simple answer is, yeah, it may be. It can. What is really key when you look at some of that stuff is, if you're out looking at a site location and you hit up maybe a Burger King that Brooke has financed, and you get like a $20 bill for, we're not going to go down and look at a $20 expense item. There are some limitations in terms of what David and my team will look at in terms of what can count. But essentially, it's anything involved in any expense involved with the search. Again, it could be, leasehold, rent, or it could be everything goes into that. It is pretty wide open at the end of the day. But again, each lender, it does have a dollar level where they will not go down and check on. I think ours, If any of my closers are on the call, they may shoot me at the end of the day, but I think it's like a $500 or $1,000 on that. That is the, minimum we'll drive down into looking at.
Yeah, I might add, just a note to that. And really, it's going back to Joe's previous point. So, and actually, I'll just address the question as it's written and in a short way. And the answer would be no, it wouldn't be collateral, right? Any bank is going to consider collateral a hard asset that has value in liquidation or resale. So just to cover that, just in case. But as it relates to equity, yes, all of those things can count as equity. But to bring Joe's previous point back, tracking all of those expenses, keeping your receipts, keeping your bank statements. And the reason that this is being highlighted is because the lender is required to verify that you have spent that money. And if you cannot verify it, it does not count. So again, on the whole minimum $500 thing, we're very similar in that way. And that is just simply an administrative kind of hurdle amount that, about $500, and everything has to be verified. So even to the extent that when you start on your journey to franchise entrepreneurship and you establish and I see it, and Mike, we might want to do like speed dating with some of these questions because they're fantastic. But as you get on your journey, establish your C Corp, LLC, whatever entity you decide to form, set up an account, and really start keeping records, through that account. It'd just be enormously helpful to you in the process.
And so to be clear, David's exactly right. These questions are great. We will get them all addressed. If not during the session, then shortly thereafter. So know that these questions will be answered. It's such great conversation or topics that you guys have asked about. We'll likely get to them all because it's really good content. But I don't want to miss the opportunity to get a larger market perspective. We'll share that as a group. And then again, if we don't get to all these questions, we'll address them afterwards. Couldn't get away from the news yesterday around the Fed changing the rate. So the Fed funds rate was dropped by 0.5% or 50 basis points, the way the lenders on the phone or on the line talk. And so that was a big change. And that was after us all carrying a 20-year high interest rate, which we suspect impacted the way a lot of you thought about growth. I may be able to push out a poll question while we're on this topic to see if how everyone has thought about interest rates. But maybe Gretchen, I'll start with you. Your perspective around that interest rate change. I guess you guys anticipated it for a while. Have you seen any headwinds in terms of either transaction volume change because of the historically long higher rates? And again, not the historically highest rates, but they were high for a good stretch. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts and what are you guys seeing out there? If I'm able to push out this poll question, that'll be in the background while Gretchen talks.
We are not based on prime, unlike SBA. So yes, they were still high, clearly, but we're not as knee-jerk. We don't like if prime changed yesterday, we're not changed today. It's a little different that way. In regards to the headwinds, I would say not a ton in the sense of the builds. I didn't see many builds slow down. I feel like we go to a lot of trade shows, but if you find good real estate, you're taking it, and we'll pretty it up later in regards to what the loan looks like, because you can't pass up good real estate right now. And you can always refinance, right? Those are always the things that we've been saying. I would say there were some hesitations with acquisitions at this level of rate, especially the ones, IRH, we're 10,000 to 10 million. I will say that the higher $1 million acquisitions slowed down a little bit with those high rate scenarios that they're waiting to see if they could get, a seller will get more with lower rates because the buyer can finance more. It cash flows better. So that's where we saw it. We didn't really see much of a slowdown with the others.
Right. And Brooke, you're kind of the tip of the spear as far as engaging with early stage franchisees for those who are new to SBA lending or conventional lending, as the case might be, some people have their mortgage rated, under 4. And all of a sudden now they're learning about a business loan and the rates might begin with a 10. So what did you see over the last period of time around because rates were higher? Is that a question you hear a lot?
I would say the conversations over the last couple of years have certainly been tough compared to when we were looking at prime being much, much lower. A lot of people felt it. We had a lot of conversations with existing business owners that saw their variable rate go from 6 to 11. That's really, really hard to deal with when it happens so quickly too. But to Gretchen's point, we saw a lot of people that still said, I understand that, interest rates are high, but this is, not a short-term play. We're looking at like the long-term solution. And over time, we do expect interest rates to get back to a more close to the average place. So certainly there was some hesitation. There were people who said, I want to put more money in because it makes more sense for my business cash flow and my startup to not have such a high loan payment. But overall, we have still seen a lot of people that are kind of seizing the moment to open the business or buy the business.
Great. And so if you see the results that I'm sharing, hopefully I'm sharing this successfully, is just over 40% of the people said that the interest rates were not impacting their growth plans, which means flip of that coin is the majority were slowed down in this time period. Joe, since you had a long deliberative question thrown to you that David got a yes/no answer, I'll ask you on the SBA side, what does it mean for a rate change? So if I'm an SBA borrower and I've had my SBA loan for the last 24 months and my rate hasn't changed, or may have had the last 6 months and my rates haven't changed at all, when would I see a change in light of this new rate change?
Sure. Great question, Mike. So if you have a floating rate SBA loan, which most startup franchises will be, you will see they usually adjust on a calendar quarterly basis. So again, first quarter runs from January 1 to March 31st, changes, April 1st. If you've got something that's up, it will come down, just like, a theory of relativity, So I'm imparting that on here. And although I did get a text from one of my guys that said, if I make a Sopranos reference, he will pay me $100. So I will split it with all you guys for lunch. So make the reference there. We'll take care of that. So if you're sitting at September 1st and you close your loan, the rate is the prime rate in effect at the time it was SBA approved, not necessarily closed. So that really becomes critical to determining the opening rate. But if it is a floating rate, prime just changed yesterday on the 18th. When your payment comes up on October 1st, then at that point in time, the rate will decrease 50 basis points or 0.5% on it. So you will enjoy the benefit of that. But sadly, it may take some time. If you closed your loan, just July 1st, you've got to wait a little bit. You had to experience that a little bit longer on that. But again, it will go down, which is good.
Good. Helpful, Joe. Thanks. So, Gretchen, I want to come to you with a question that we received from one of our audience members. Had a transaction and it fell through due to historical losses. So they appealed for financing. Looks like the historical track record wasn't strong. They were looking for non-SBA lending. I had a turnaround plan. It involved real estate. I had the net worth. That transaction could have been perhaps executed on a conventional basis. How does BoeFly work with lenders on a non-SBA basis? Now, you're a non-SBA lender. Tell us a little bit about your criteria. So for IRH in particular, but maybe also some of your peers in the market, if I show up with a franchise that I'm looking to finance and I say, well, I don't want to go SBA for various reasons, and I want to go conventional, and maybe it's always my default position, I want to go conventional, I'll only go SBA if I can't go conventional. What allows me to qualify for a conventional product? And particularly when you hear about historical losses, how does that also dovetail to your thoughts?
Sure. So generically, we like 2 years time in business. Right. We will work with new franchisees depending on the franchise, which leads into someone else's question down there. So your franchise does matter. So there are certain franchises that we work with that will work with new franchisees. But in general, we like 2 years time in business. Once you have the 2 years time in business and being a non-SBA lender, just a few things I feel that SBA is a nice conservative option for people. It's a bigger loan. We don't do it. People always ask me, we don't do a percentage injection of the total project cost like SBA does, like that 10 to 20%, like David said. We're coming in saying we're going to finance equipment and construction, some working capital, depending on what that is. But generically, we're doing the equipment and construction, no projections, no business plans. And that's how we just move on. This is what we are. And we don't need your tenant allowances. You can have those. I don't ask for proof of payment, anything you've already paid. I'm saying, here are the vendors that I'm paying, and this is how we do it. Now, that being said, with historical losses, I don't work on projections. Like an SBA might be able to get that transaction done with some projections, possibly. For us, that's going to be a heavy lift. We're looking at you as an operator, your liquidity. That is the number one thing I would probably say on this call for us is liquidity and cash flow trends are really important.
Is it fair to say that on the conventional side that you're looking to make sure there's very little ambiguity that business is capable of paying your principal and interest payments?
That's correct.
Right. And so in this case, the question came in of, hey, I've got a great turnaround situation. That's great. But the historical tells me that it currently doesn't cash flow. Therefore, conventional lender is probably not a good fit for that.
Yeah, that's correct. Again, it depends on the franchise. There's some that we've had a long enough relationship and the portfolio has been strong enough that we will take that leaper. But in that case, in any of those cases with historical losses, we'd like outside income. So it's outside of the business. We'd like liquidity. So we talk about the cash burn. The cash burn's real, right? So if you're saying this is a turnaround situation, do you have the liquidity to make my payments and the losses of the business for 6 to 12 months during the turnaround? So if you're strong enough, yes. And if that makes sense, then yeah, we've talked about that. If you can carry it, then we may proceed. But in general, we really want to see that it can self-sustain, even for acquisitions, right? If your business is doing well and you're buying a store that's not, we want to see that your business then can sustain. You can pay the payments on the stores that you're buying that aren't cash flowing.
So, David, Gretchen just brought up this idea of another question that we have in our queue of, hey, how does the franchisor fit in this, or how does the franchise brand fit in this from an underwriting perspective? Tell us a little bit how you think of that from your perspective on the underwriting side around how does the brand fit in?
That's part of the magic of franchise finance. So I see a question that asks if it matters, right? The concept matters. And the answer is, it's almost concept first. That may be an exaggeration, but yes. So the concept matters. And, Gretchen's made the point, lenders will absolutely kind of in-house approve the concepts, the franchises that they're going to work with.
That's right.
They're going to do a significant amount of due diligence on the brand, on that concept, on that franchisor. Obviously, the easy things like the store performance, love to see some item 19 data around financials, right? Things like that. But then right down to the franchisor's financial performance, right? Do they have the capability to meet their constituents' needs going forward? Because going back to how important the franchise is, we are relying on that model, right? And the historical performance of that model to perform, which is why if an entrepreneur with, say, little or no experience in, I won't pick an industry, but that particular concept doesn't have the business experience like that is exactly, I'll just say a coffee shop, right? If you've never run a coffee shop before, but you have outside experience that, is relevant, then yes, we are relying on that model, right? They are giving you, here's the operational book. If you do this, you should perform at least to our average store. Again, in broad generalization, but yeah, the strength of the franchise, the concept is very important.
It's great. Joe, why don't you noodle on that for a second? I think I want to allow you guys to comment on that as well. But Brooke, before we do, I want to maybe pivot for 1 second. There's a question around, I'm going to say outside income, and I'm going to add in there this idea of post-closing liquidity or post-transaction liquidity. Give us a little bit of your insight of how a franchisee should be mindful of their liquidity position and their available liquidity after the loan were to close, and how that kind of comes into play. And then also that outside income, particularly if they don't have an outside income going forward.
Yeah. So what Gretchen was saying about liquidity being super important, I feel like we've only seen that grow over the past couple of years. We're seeing, on average, let's say on average, most of our lenders are looking for around a 20% equity injection. That's the loan down payment. And then they're looking for money after that to make sure that you as the borrower have cash in case you need it for the business, for yourself. No lender will let you close with $0 left in your bank account. So let's just call it a rule of thumb, 10% extra. That amount can change based on your personal debt and payments and if you have sustained outside income. So if I'm opening this business and I have a ton of debt and I have no outside income, that's going to make it more challenging than if I, let's say, was going to have additional sources of income from a spouse, from other businesses, rental income that can help me make those monthly payments without needing the business. The cash, I can't say this enough, is just so important to making sure you can get your transaction approved. One of the things Mike and I were talking about before, we see people that have large liquidity positions come to us and say, well, I think I'll just use cash for my first one and then I'll come back to you to finance the second one. We always recommend the reverse. While you have that high liquidity, let's get you financing. Let's make sure you're up and running, and then you can look at using cash for the following units, because if you're short on cash when you're ready to open store number 2, that's one of the first things that someone can look at your application and say, there's just not enough here. We need more liquidity to get this done.
And so I think that one of the themes of that question, and I think Brooke nailed it on the idea of liquidity, is also this question of, we don't necessarily need outside income, but the lender really wants to make sure you're going to be able to meet your monthly obligations and get through the initial launch period to be successful. And that, certainly something that no lender on this call wants to put someone in a position that's not going to be on a successful track. And so if you get a pile of liquidity, that's great. If you have an outside income to support, that's great, but they want to make sure they have that really clear view that they're going to have success. So Joe, I want to get back to you. David addressed, brand does matter. Your perspective on this, but also I want you to, remember there's a lot of franchisors that are on. And so what advice might you have? So knowing that brand matters, and I'm going to put you in that same category, as my guess is that brand does play a role on your underwriting stage. Give us your thoughts around what advice you have on the franchisor to be a positive support in the lending realm as it relates to when brand matters. What can they do? And if you ever get in a tough situation, what would you as a lender want the brand to do to support you guys?
Wow. Boy, I got a multifaceted question too. Just to talk about the differences between SBA and conventional, hone in on what Gretchen said about the brand. She does not rely on projections. She relies on historical. Okay. A lot of times, David and I don't have that benefit. We are relying on projections. So if it's an established brand, we know by virtue of the FDD what's in the back. We've got some item 19, paragraph 19 in the back, which does go into the history, and goes into the economics of the franchisor, which is really kind of critical. And David again referenced it. Do they have the sustainability and the profit and loss, the balance sheet to get the franchisee through things? So we do look at their financial statement, which is also represented in the FDD. So it really is kind of critical because, again, we don't have that historical cash flow to rely on. We have to rely on projections. And, I always, my wife always laughed at me because I would come home from work and say, hey, I saw a wax franchise. She goes, what the heck do you know about that? And I'm like, well, I obviously know nothing, but I go in the back of the FDD and I go, and I start to learn, and I could see, if you've got a national concept, how somebody on the East Coast is doing versus the West Coast. And that does factor prominently into our decision. I mean, same with David's. This is what we look at, because we could see what the profit and loss looks like in different regions. And that does become fairly critical for us when looking at things. So again, it plays the utmost important and helps us validate projections, which is really kind of critical for what we do. I mean, I think David and I would love to have somebody come in who's got historical cash flow and is looking to do a second location, really quickly. We'd be on their tax returns, by the way. We'd be so happy to see that. We'd be, I won't say doing cartwheels, because that would not be a pretty picture for people, but we would be extremely happy to see that.
And so, Joe, and advice to the franchisor: if you guys ever get in a challenging situation with one of your franchisee borrowers, what would you counsel the franchisors that are listening? Should they play a role? Are they hands off?
Listen, I believe that they should. I mean, because they're, borrowers or franchisees are relying on that franchise to assist them. Sometimes with, the franchisors reach out to like Brooke to help them with the financing, but there is the alternative when something is not going well. If they're hearing, they talk to the franchisee on a daily basis or weekly basis for the most part. Hey, how are things going? What are you seeing? You seeing any, issues with getting product in that you're selling? Where the dollar amounts and the costs? And a lot of times they are really in tune with that. And if there is a problem and a lender does reach out to you, I really encourage you to kind of step up and help them and, have a free and open conversation about what's going to happen. This is a happy call, so we're talking about people looking to get in business. But, we also have, calls where the borrower has to exit the business for a variety of reasons. I think over the past 6 months, we've seen health issues pop up, which is kind of insane when you think about it, because I had never seen that ever before in my, SBA career, where a borrower, somebody got sick and couldn't manage the business. We got in touch with the franchisor immediately and said, hey, you don't want it to go dark. We don't want to have to, kick everybody out and put a lock on it. Let's try to work together. And most times it's a symbiotic relationship where people do work together and find a way out. I mean, listen, David would take that call any day of the week. Somebody calling him and saying, hey, we know somebody who's having some issues or maybe a problem with the lease. What can we do? But the earlier we get to it, the better. If we find out after the landlord has already, put the lock on the door, then everybody's hands are kind of tied at that point in time. And then again, I see Gretchen nodding. So obviously that, is applicable to her side of the fence too.
Yeah, that's great, Joe. And obviously, when we think about value proposition to the franchisor, BoeFly is, couldn't be happier than to connect the parties. It's what we like to do best, right? So if we're working with an array of franchisees from a given brand, we have pretty good insight as far as where they took their financing from in a way that the franchisor often won't, and we can make that connection point. I do want to take David's advice around getting some speed round questions in because there's some great questions. We may not get to all of them, and I do want to be respectful of everyone's time. We may bleed over a little bit past the hour mark, but this is being recorded. If any of our audience members have to drop off, we'll get you a recording. Gretchen, I'm going to start with you in EIDL or an EIDL loan. Talk to me. If I'm a borrower and I've got an existing EIDL loan, does that impact your ability to underwrite a next project? Will they subordinate? How does all that fit in? And I'll maybe David, if you can talk on the SBA side next. So Gretchen, you first.
Yeah, that's a quick, because it's very common. So for the EIDL, we want to do, it's part of the cash flow. So most of those have already started monthly payments. So we're going to put that in the cash flow. Are you covering? It is a blanket lien on your company. So for us, you have two options on the conventional side. We can ask for the subordination, which we've seen a real change in the sense that they're wanting pay downs. If you're expanding, they'll want you to pay down the EIDL loan. Or you can just form a new corporation and then we all move on. It doesn't count at all. Right. And that seems to be the more common is people don't want to pay down. So they form a new corporation and then I lend to the new corporation.
David,
but it's still got a cash flow.
Yeah, makes sense. David, anything to add or adjust on
that? Yeah. So most lenders on the conventional side will require the subordination of the EIDL loan. 8 months ago, the SBA was doing it almost in a day, right? Almost no questions asked.
Approve.
Because of the focus on EIDL and quite frankly PPP, they're really not doing that anymore for conventional lenders. Happens, but I have seen, yes, we'll subordinate if you pay 50% of it, or you got to pay all of it. So in certain circumstances, to Gretchen's point, new entity might be the way around that. Otherwise, it is easier for an SBA 7A lender to obtain a subordination on an EIDL loan than it is for a conventional lender. So I can routinely obtain, but the reason for that is generally because of the aggressive nature of the financing. We are in place maybe because the borrower that is coming to me doesn't have the amount of liquidity that a conventional lender might want to see. So when the SBA looks at that, wow, got a lot of liquidity, you've taken EIDL funds, we want a little bit of that back. On the SBA side, it is a little bit different, and there is that symbiosis between the SBA lender and the SBA that facilitates it. It's been a headache. It really has.
Probably not going away just yet. So Gretchen, I'll hop back to you. I'll ask as written, what possible advantages or disadvantages are associated with using conventional or SBA loans as opposed to a C Corp if you were a prospective franchisee having to sign an agreement requiring a personal guarantee? So you guys do require a personal guarantee, Gretchen, on your financing?
Correct. That's correct.
So if I'm trying to go ahead and be a franchisee who said, I want to avoid a personal guarantee, SBA and conventional is almost always going to require it.
Always.
Yeah. And then maybe a quick bullet on anything that you feel like hasn't been addressed. Why might I choose conventional over SBA?
Right. I think more for the existing franchisees and franchisors on the call, it's alive. We're quick. We have great turnaround, very similar in the sense of you're dealing with someone for, it's our team the whole time. You're not passed off. And then on the conventional side, I really feel it's just less, right? And I love SBA. I'm a fan of it too. But in my world, like I said, we don't need all of those other things. We don't have the fees. We don't have the parameters that they have to go by. It's a government loan, right? There are things that they have to stay in the box for. We can get creative. We can go up to 10 million. Whereas 7A is limited to 5 million. So there's those capabilities as well. And then just in the sense of what we're looking for the existing franchisee, I can do credit app only up to 300,000, pull your credit and move on. Those are the things.
Makes sense.
Hey, Mike, on that point, if I could just jump in. To Gretchen's point, the process is somewhat more streamlined. Yes, the SBA program does require additional documentation and a few more boxes, so don't deny it. However, that does point out the importance of working with an experienced SBA lender, and B, a preferred SBA lender. And the two on the call, check both of those boxes. I wish give him a shout out. Our Daniel Mass, our development person on franchise, has actually, funded loans for businesses that went to their community bank. Extraordinarily valuable, the community banking industry. We are one, just happen to be a little bit larger as a community bank, but not as experienced in processing an SBA loan. And, 90 days down the road, you find out that, this section of the SOP didn't get checked and we're having a problem. So again, yes, a few more check boxes, a little more documentation process, but work with an experienced and a PLP lender. And in this case, one that has experience in franchise. It matters.
So just to clarify that PLP is that preferred lender program allows David or Joe's institution to basically decision and bind the SBA without having to go to them for specific approval, which is great. Brooke, a question comes in: if you're looking to purchase the real estate instead of a lease, Is it best to package it all under SBA or finance the real estate separately? Do you have any, have you come across that much?
Yeah, I'd say in most cases we like to do it together. When we do it together, it just makes it a lot simpler overall, but we can make sure that you're getting the land and everything that needs to be done for the build out permit wise, checked all of the appropriate boxes. A horror story is you do the bridge loan and then God forbid you don't have the permits to actually do the building, or it's not zoned correctly and you're stuck holding the land. And not able to do your business. So ideally, we'd like to do it all together. And generally, we can push out those terms to 25 years and get a little more competitive on the financing.
So, Gretchen, resales. So franchise resales, is there a minimum profit margin that you're looking to see on an acquisition? Can you speak to an EBITDA multiple that maybe you guys require?
I think SBA too, but we ask for 1.25 coverage. 1.25. Generically, that just means for every dollar of debt, we want to see that you're making $1.25 in profit. So just layman's terms. So that's what our coverage ratios are. For an EBITDA, I'm going to say that I'm seeing most acquisitions 3.5 to 5 times EBITDA hitting my desk. It's a little rich for us, over 5 these days. But that's just what's hitting in my world. And for us, we'll go up to 100% financing for an acquisition if it cash flows.
Great. And they have to have an existing location or not necessarily?
Not necessarily.
Okay. And Joe, I want to get you in here for something that maybe feels like an SBA loan. Our particular franchise does not require significant investment in building or leasehold improvement. It does need considerable working capital for personnel. The biggest item, maybe it's a staffing business, marketing, other operational expenses. Is there a limitation, Joe, by SBA to use their loan mostly for operational working capital?
No, I mean, SBA doesn't give you any prohibitions on how you use the working capital. But again, as a lender, I think I could speak for David. We'd want to see a detailed analysis in terms of where do you think that's going to go? You know, how many employees are you going to, are going to get paid? What is their hourly or annual rate? We just want a little bit more detail, and also how that's going to impact the projections. You know, hiring, we get a lot of requests for people hiring a salesperson, and they say, hey, we want to hire and we're going to build and we're going to get 500,000 more in gross revenue. But nothing in between that tells us what these people are going to do and how they're going to do that. So, you know, the in-between steps on the projections and again, business plans and the support of the assumptions are really kind of critical to what we do. I do have my nickname for those are the Field of Dreams ones where, you know, if you build it, they will come. Yeah, that's great. It was an outstanding movie, still classic, love it. But that doesn't help us get a credit approval. I mean, at the end of the day. So, you know, the in-between is really kind of critical on the projections. So pay special attention to that.
Great. I think I'm going to close with Brooke and David. So this is a theme that so many of the franchisees that are on this call are looking to grow. We see a lot that are in that zero category getting to their first unit. My suspicion is they're not just buying a 1-unit license, they may be buying a 3-unit license or a 3-unit development agreement. Brooke, give us your perspective on when you're working with that franchisee, say, I want to open up unit 1, but I've got this larger plan. How do you advise them? And David, I'd like to get your thoughts on that when Brooke's done.
Yeah, I like to start with knowing what their plan is so we can help them understand the metrics to get there. It depends on the person's overall package and how strong they are. Sometimes we see people that can get approved for 2 units at once to start, but more often than not, lenders want to see that franchisees start with 1 unit, show the success, and then, you know, we'll look at financing the following ones. And once you've got a proven track record, you'll see it's easier to get financing. But certainly, again, going back to the liquidity position, just making sure that in your mind, you're thinking about how am I going to put down the money for the next one. And the other thing that we see as very important is having overall good tax returns and books, because when you're looking to get that following unit, the lender is going to say, show me your tax returns and then show me your year-to-date P&L and balance sheet. And a lot of times what we see is, well, I am really behind on my books and, you know, here's halfway done, and that just doesn't cut it. We really recommend using a professional bookkeeper to keep track of your books, to make sure you've got a good team in place to put together your tax returns, to think about growth from the beginning so that you have financials that are showing how well you're doing, because that's going to be what lenders are looking for to approve your next unit.
It's a great point. I heard all but an amen from Gretchen in there. So, David, I'd like to get you in here and your thoughts on that individual, that franchisee who has a vision of getting to more. How quickly can they get there?
Yeah. So to Brooke's point, yeah, absolutely important to keep those records. At ConnectOne Bank, we don't necessarily have a policy with regard to you start business one and you need to be in business for 2 years or a year, right? That said, we do not, from an SBA perspective, these are term loans, and we are going to make a loan for a specific project. We're not going to commit on January 1 to do a project that will close, by March, and then commit to a project in 2 years, right? So when you embark, so you do get into a 3-unit agreement, you're going to open your first store. Advice, right? Obviously, books and records. Leverage the first location to the hilt, save your liquidity. And then keep in touch with the lender. Guarantee you that your lender's note, loan agreement, etc., is going to require financial information, either on an annual basis, sometimes on a monthly basis. Get them that information. Keep in touch with them. Because if you're going to go, say, as fast as 6 or 9 months to that second location, and you have stayed in touch with the lender, the trajectory of that first location is good. You are trending toward projections. Maybe you're profitable, etc. It just gives you a leg up in being able to have a lender consider that second location sooner rather than later. So again, no specific guideline or policy on how fast you can do it. But right, the financial data at the time of the second request is important.
Awesome. So I think that I'll close out the session with communication between you and your lender is critical. Getting financial data is going to be super important, but also talking about what your strategy is, because your lender wants to get that understood. So I couldn't be more thankful of Brooke, Joe, Gretchen, and David for lending your expertise and your perspective. You guys, you're such good friends of ours, and thank you for investing the time to educate our friends, our franchisees and franchisors. For our audience that took the time to join, we can't appreciate you guys more, and we're excited for more growth to come. The feds seem like they're helping us. We know these lenders want to help you guys all grow, and so we look forward to continuing to engage with you at BoeFly, and we'll be having another one of these events soon. So thank you very much. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.